Connect for Jira training. I'm Robert Belarjan. Today we're going to focus a little bit on the admin side of reporting, how it operates, and what you need to know to be successful in utilizing reporting with Jira as well as the IBM EOM tools. And so when we look at reporting in the OSLC space, there's a few things that we need to pay attention to. So when working with IBM, what we're trying to do is enable Report Builder and engineering insights to be able to report on your Jira data in conjunction with the IBM data. And to do so, we have to understand a little bit more about some of the things that happen in the background. IBM EOM does these things anyway between its tools, but when we add another tool to the enterprise, there's some of the self-management that doesn't exist there, so you as the admin have to have a little bit more hands-on approach to this. And so there's a few things that you need to understand here and pay attention to. First of all, tracked resource feeds. These TRS feeds are the identifications of artifacts that have changed, been updated, that require an index to be able to go visit them and understand the artifacts of those and get indexed in a tool like LQE. And LQE is the index that Report Builder and Engineering Insights uses to report on data. So it's important to be able to pay attention to this information and understand that Jira is providing a TRS feed, LQE is consuming a TRS feed, and that's the basis for doing any of the reporting that we might do. Which also means that there's important elements of LQE that you as the admin have to pay attention to. What is the status of LQE? Is it reading that TRS feed correctly, or is there some enterprise issue that's intervened? As well as the permission model around LQE, so that the project level information is made available to people who need it. And then the concept of a Metamodel. And underneath all those nice user interfaces in Report Builder that allows you to pick a type and a link relationship to be able to structure reports is a Metamodel, and that's actually something that's being rebuilt on a daily basis, but an admin can force it to be updated sooner so that you have all the attributes that you want to be able to take a look at in there. So that's what we're going to focus on. And when we look at those TRS feeds, the important thing is to be able to make sure this is how we consume the Jira data. And TRS basically is providing some update notifications. So anytime you're making a modification in that Jira resource, that's included as one of the changed artifacts in that TRS feed, which identifies the LQE as it pulls TRS. Wait a minute, I need to go index this resource again and update that data within that repository. And so what we have to do is pay attention to that data source feed, be able to make sure it's updated, because if it isn't updating or if there's an issue reading it, we're not going to get any updates from the Jira side. And so there's reasons that might happen. Somebody might pause the data source. You might have restarted your Jira service, and for some reason you didn't reactivate the TRS feed. There's multiple different reasons why. Most of them are really enterprise-related issues. It just makes sense to be able to watch that and be able to make sure that that is in a positive state. We'll show you that to you in the demonstration. The other side of this is LQE permissions. The way that LQE operates is indexing all that information for you to be able to do reports. It actually has its own separate permission model, even for the IBM data. And so we'll take a look at how those permissions are set up. IBM itself, on their data sources like Doors Next, automatically creates groups, permission groups that allow access to that information based on the membership of a project within the Doors Next tool. We don't necessarily do that with Jira because we don't know whether or not you have the same user directory in the IBM EOM tools as you do in Jira. And so there's some different ways in which you can manage those permission models, either being very permissive or being able to inherit some of the definitions that are on the IBM side. We'll walk you through a few of those to give you an idea of what you can do on that and what we recommend. And then Metamodel and Metamodel updates. The Metamodel consists of all the projects that you have, all the Jira issue types, all the attribute types. Those are the important things for us to be able to structure a report. And so this is going to be updated on a periodic basis. By default, it runs on a nightly basis in most IBM deployments, but an admin can force an update when we've added a project, when somebody's made a change the resource shapes in Jira. To be able to add some more attributes, you may want to be able to force that Metamodel update. So we'll show you how to be able to do that and be able to go explore that. So let's go ahead and show it live. I think it makes the most sense to be able to see these things, see what it should look like within your environment. So first of all, let's go ahead and take a look from the Jira side, what we expect to see. This is just the admin side of OSLC Connect for Jira. The important thing for you to be able to take a look at here is tracked resource sets. And there's a few things to be able to pay attention to here. Number one is you get to set a TRS functional user. This functional user is the one who has the permissions to be able to see all the artifacts in Jira, to be able to create these tracked resource sets and be able to let people know, or not people, but necessarily your authenticated servers that are reading those TRS feeds, have access to those artifacts. So this is usually a service account, and it provides the mechanism for them to be able to see those. We do provide some hints and tips here, because we have two separate TRS feeds. One is for projects, and the other is actually for the actual Jira issues. So you'll be able to see some statistics and how big they are. Also, we have the ability to preview what projects are here. The reason why we do this is depending on which service account you use for that TRS feed, they may or may not have access to a particular project. This is a quick way to be able to go take a look and say, okay, within this TRS feed, I should have the project that I expect. In this case, we've been talking about training project. Training project will be in those TRS feeds, so we should be able to see that project and have access to that in LQE and in Report Builder. At any point in time, you can come in here and force these to be rebuilt. And what it means to rebuild that is to be able to rebuild the TRS feed from scratch, which will basically tell everybody to re-index all that information. So you'll have to, if you rebuild this, and there'll be a toaster warning up here that'll tell you to be able to go do that. You'll want to re-index those within within the LQE and LDX applications. And so if you do that, just be aware of that. It can be a situation if you've had some major changes in your IT environments, or you have some inconsistency in how you believe they're operating. Sometimes it's easier to just come back here, reinitiate these TRS feeds, rebuild the indexes in LQE, and operations will continue to operate the way you expect from that point on. But that's the side from the Jira side. And now let's go ahead and take a look at the other side. The other side is going to be LQE. LQE, let's actually get over here, data sources in LQE. Here is LQE, or at least my LQE. You'll see, unsurprisingly, there's a lot of feeds in here. These feeds are mostly IBM feeds, so you'll see Doors Next, you'll see EETM, so Quality Manager, Engineering Test Manager, EWM, resources as well. And you'll see that there's multiple different feeds for each of these. And then you're down here and see some custom ones. You'll see my OSLC Connect for Jira resources that are both CM resources, which is all your issues, process resources, which are all your projects. Those are there, and those are happy and up to date. That's what you expect to see. If you had issues, you'll see them one of two ways. You can see up here EWM actually has an issue. There's a skipped resource, meaning that there's a resource that typically it's something that's actually been deleted, and it's identifying that it's no longer indexing that resource and moving on. And that's just a warning that's there. Those things are transient and not something to be able to worry about. Things to worry about are these red X's. Those are identifications that there's been a failure on that data source, and it will usually tell you that there's an action to be taken. In this case, I think this server is actually down and unavailable, so that makes sense that the TRS feed isn't available. But it might also mean that there's some inconsistency in that TRS feed in terms of what it read and what it's currently reading. Situations of that could be things like you've restored a Jira repository to 30 minutes before the last time that IBM had read that information, so there might be some inconsistencies in that data. It would force you to be able to do a reindex or rebuild the information, and then you'd be happy and be able to operate. So most of the time you're just going to see green checks. That's a good thing. But if somebody asks and wonders whether or not there's information available, you can go back to Jira to be able to make sure your projects are visible. You can go back to LQE and make sure that it's reading the latest data. And then we can go on and move into reporting and be able to take a look at reports and be able to see the information that's there. So let's take a look at reports and be able to show a couple things in here. And what we're going to look at here is the type of data sources that we can use. We can use the lifecycle query engine, scope by configuration. So if we're using GC, we can use just a basic lifecycle query engine. What we can't use with Jira data is the data warehouse. We're not populating the data warehouse. We're only populating LQE. So we can go ahead and pick that as a data source. What we then can do is we can limit the scope. Limiting the scope means that we can pick a project or certain projects that we want to be able to consume data from for doing that report and be able to have the capability to be able to look for that information. What you see here is I actually have a check mark on training project. That should look familiar because that should look like the project that we've had in Jira in these training sessions, and it is. What is a bit curious is you'll see that Report Builder automatically puts on the end of this it's a CCM project area. It only does that because it assumes that all change management projects are CCM and it does not assume external resources. And so you'll have to pay attention to that. Keep in mind that you want to look for your Jira project name by project name, and you should be able to see that within the list of scoped projects. When we hit continue, what you'll be able to see is that we've added an additional resource within a Report Builder. So this is actually what's been updated in the Metamodel. It knows now that there's a Jira issue in that project, and I can actually do some reporting on this. You'll also see that in kind of the hierarchy of change requests, you'll see that a Jira issue is on the same level as a work item from EWM. So you can do reporting using those hierarchy of types if you want. And we can just do a simple report, which is just give me all the listed Jira issues in that project. And you'll be able to see when we do reports like this, we'll see that here's actually the data associated with that project. So I only have 4 issues in there right now. That gives me my issues, my issue links. If I want to add an attribute, I can. Maybe I want to be able to do a creation date and add that on there. Or add the description. I can actually add both of those things on there. And if I refresh this report, you'll see that we're actually being able to gather all this information that's been coming from Jira. It's in this report. Some of these actually don't have a description, but you can see one that actually during the demo I did actually add a description. We have that content there. That should give you a sense of how to be able to have information there. There is one item that we should focus on, which is updating that Metamodel. If somebody comes into Report Builder and one of two things happens. If they go to limit scope and they can't see a project, if they come into format results and they go to add an attribute and an attribute is in here, oftentimes that means that we have not updated the Metamodel yet. This happens on a nightly basis. It's usually pretty rare for somebody to add a project and immediately start doing reporting. So most of the time we don't see those issues. If that does happen though, we can come over here and look at our data sources and be able to force an update in the Metamodel. And if we go to Lifecycle Query Engine, this is what this refresh button is. It allows us to be able to refresh that Metamodel. You'll be able to see down here the last time that it refreshed it. So it can give you a sense of when the last time you did it. So this was actually one that I forced this morning. Usually this is around midnight when that actually identifies an update has occurred. So you can be able to push that simple as doing a refresh on very large systems. That's going to take maybe 10 minutes to refresh the Metamodel. On a smaller system like mine, it will probably take a couple minutes. The other thing of note that I would point out here is that the lifecycle query engine scope by configuration is actually related to that LQE data source, so it's dependent on it. That's why you'll see a little different icon here. You can't do a refresh here. If you want to do a refresh, you just click on this icon. It goes back to the base data source, and then you can do the refresh there. And you'll see that it will tell you that it's refreshing the type system model, and when it finishes update, it will go green. The other thing I would tell you is going back to your report page, make sure you do a forced refresh on that, or users do a forced refresh on that to be able to make sure that there's no cached information on your local system that might not provide you all the information you expect to be able to see there. And that's kind of the basics. The one other thing that we haven't talked about here is the permission model. And let's go back to LQE and we can talk about permissions. Permissions are actually applied at the project level or at the data source level. So you'll be able to see a default configuration that I have definitely for my own system, as well as when we're doing initial evaluations. We're oftentimes just adding the group everyone. So when we look at these groups, you'll know that ultimately there's always an everyone group in every IBM system. Basically this says give me all the users that are there. That makes sure that everybody has access to that information. That is not always the case in which you want to operate. What you'll see is that each of these other projects, and we can take a look at like doors next, each of these other projects has a definition of a project group. And that group is defining who has access to those resources for reporting. If we click on this group, what we'll see is this is actually a user group that's automatically created by a synchronizer. So this is a service in the background that's always operating for these projects, and make sure that as you add and remove people from your Doors Next project, they're added here. So one of the things that we often tell teams that are looking for a more restricted permission model is take a look at your project relationships that you've done within Jira to the IBM system, and go ahead and align to one of the projects that you plan to do reporting with. If you're always doing reporting with Doors Next and Jira data, go ahead and use this project group as your permission group for your Jira project. So you can see if I go in here on my Jira project, I could come in here and be able to say on that training project that I was using, I could add a group in here, and I could actually use that group that we saw being used for that Doors Next project, which I think was this HQ one. But you can update those names and utilize that. We can use that definition and be able to have control over where we apply those permissions. So in this case, if I only want to do permissions for this, I can go ahead and select that HQ again, because I was inheriting from the top level at first. And once we do this, it means only those people that have access to that training group Doors project have access to the training project Jira data. So it's a good way to be able to have both controlled permission on who can do reporting, but to be able to take advantage of the automatic management of those groups by the IBM tools, and knowing that the IBM tools is using the same user group. It's a good way to be able to manage that. So hopefully that gives you an idea of what to be able to do with adminning the reporting with Jira data. It's only an introduction. We'll have another session on how to actually do reports and what you should pay attention to. If you have questions, please reach out to our team and ask questions. Our support desk is always available to help you be successful with our tools. Thanks for the time, and we'll talk more soon.